the moment that I arrived in Willets Point, I knew that the days were numbered, even though the mechanics had survived for about 40 years in their fight against New York City that wanted to evict them from day one. And they couldn't see that the end was around the corner, but I could see it because I was an outsider.
All right.
All right. So, Yonkeros was published in 2013 as a monograph by La Fábrica Editorial in Madrid, and that was my first monograph as such. I shot it during a year in a very little known enclave of New York City called Willets Point, Queens, which is a short train ride away from Grand Central Station, so 45 minutes away from New York City, from Manhattan. You have this landscape, and Willets Point is also known as the Iron Triangle, and it used to be because it's bulldozed over now, for the most part. It used to be the home to the scrap metal businesses and junkyards of New York City, mostly run by Latinos, particularly Mexicans and Ecuadorians. So I spent a year documenting this place, the landscape, the working lives, the clients, and I gave myself a year because I wanted to see how the seasons not only changed the landscape but affected the working conditions, what it means to work in the brutal heat of the summer, and what it's like to touch metal and have your fingertips freeze off and get glued to it. I mean, like, coming from Latin America, I was fascinated by this place, by the people who work there and their often checkered stories, right? So this is the main street. All the way back, you see a Pepsi Cola sign, and then behind that you see the bleachers of Citi Field Stadium, the old Shea Stadium where the Mets play baseball. And that stadium is the reason that Willets Point had to go away, because the city invested close to $1 billion to renovate that into a shining sports palace. And the last thing that then Mayor Bloomberg wanted across the street was the junkyards. And so Willets Point works on many levels. One of them is the city itself, and how New York City was evolving at the time. Let me see if I can scroll through, or if I'm not scrolling through. Like I said, most of the mechanics come from Latin America. Their life stories are complicated. They're not trained to be mechanics necessarily. They learn there in Willets Point. And there's so many stories to tell, of course. I shot about 15,000 pictures for the project, and about 100 something make it into the book, right? So it's important to be very careful with the editing. I favor the kind of surrealist style in the storytelling, like this picture of an airplane over the standstill of the cars. Of course, they're not moving; they're just blocking the street, and LaGuardia sits off to the side from Willets Point, so there's airplanes coming down all the time. Every few minutes, there's another airplane descending or rising, and yet there's maybe 3 pictures with airplanes in the book. This is one of them, and why would I choose this one? Well, because the moment is so unusual, right? I mean, we all know that airplanes don't come down on the wire; they don't slide down to land on an electric wire, and there's something about the stillness of the cars and the scale of the airplane that makes you question time. The same way that you arrive in Willets Point and you see a landscape that looks like a lunar landscape full of craters and mud. And so the whole experience of Willets Point had a lot to do with questioning your perceptions. So that's part of what I'm trying to do here.
This image, it literally looks like that airplane is on a zip line, and it's a toy airplane. It doesn't actually look like a real one. And I can definitely see that. Why did you choose black and white for this series?
Actually, the book has color as well. But I started in black and white because it's my first love. I absolutely prefer black and white. I like the aesthetic distance. I like the way it simplifies by eliminating the color content. So there's a drama in black and white that I favor. But eventually, I was actually forced to embrace color, and I don't know if we can get to that today, but when you do a photographic project, you kind of make up your own rules, but then you have to live by them. And I'm really jumping ahead here. But the moment that I arrived in Willets Point, I knew that the days were numbered, even though the mechanics had survived for about 40 years in their fight against New York City that wanted to evict them from day one. And they couldn't see that the end was around the corner, but I could see it because I was an outsider. So I had one ending figured out for the book. I went to Willets Point a few days before Christmas, and there was this incredible snowstorm that froze the trains on their tracks, and it was almost impossible to get out there. And when I finally got out there, it was surreal. Everything had come to a standstill, and I thought I would end the book on that note. And it was all black and white up until then. But then 2 weeks later, this apocalyptic ending didn't make sense because there was a second snowstorm. And I decided to go out and wait for the sunrise. And so I stood in the snow from around 4 o'clock in the morning until 5:30. And the sunrise was beautiful. So it was all pastel colors over the snow. And I realized I had to incorporate color at that point to be able to do it justice. So then fortunately, we shoot digital. We have a raw file, and even though I had interpreted all the files as black and white images, I could go back to some of them and make them color, right? So I did, because you can't end the book with 10 pages of color after it's been black and white the whole way. And that forced me to reimagine the whole book at that point in time. And the book is a mix of black and white and color, but there's a good reason for it.
Well, it makes sense, and you have a very powerful black and white. I love the contrast, and the detail you're able to pull out, and you're using portraits in such a really powerful way. Can you talk about why you felt it was important to include portraits? Because you could focus on the place or whatever, and it seems like you're telling a whole entire story here of the people and the place, and so I'm kind of curious how you're using the portrait.
Yeah, as we were talking earlier today, the photography is not created in a vacuum. It responds to your individual quest, if you want to call it, the kind of answers that you want from life. And so I was fascinated in the people who worked in Willets Point, these Latin Americans that reminded me so much of home in so many ways. Working in this landscape that was more like the third world than the first world, their particular ways of running the business, because you won't see a single computer, and yet there is a very exacting inventory of everything in Willets Point. But everything is annotated with a grease pencil, and it's, kept track of in ledgers, old school. The mechanics, they improvise solutions to everything. And in that sense, it's very artisanal. Things are created out of nothing, with blow torches and hammers, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful opposition of, let's say, third world ingenuity and survivalist strategies against first world consumerism and obsolescence. And who's responsible for that? It's the people. It's the mechanics who work there.
We have those from where I'm from, and I didn't grow up a very rich person at all. And so, like, one of the things you would do is you'd go to those junkyards if you wanted to fix your car and you wanted to find one of those things, and you'd go out there and pull the part off yourself. And then you could pay a little extra to have them do it if you wanted, so it seems this is calling up a part of where I came from. And I was kind of curious about that. Were they welcoming of you? Were you welcomed? Did you become a part of their family? How did that relationship start and form over the year that you spent there?
Which image do you have on screen right now? Do you have the man with the crucifixes on his back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the first day that I came to Willets Point, what I did was just walk around and talk to people all day. I had my camera visible on my chest, over my shoulder, etc. But I didn't take a picture the entire day. I just talked to people and kind of gauged how I was accepted. Of course, I speak Spanish, and that's incredibly important to communicate in Spanish. And I just hung out. And if they weren't too busy, then they could do a little chit chat with me, and I would circle back and wave and whatever. Towards the end of the day, I shot a few pictures. Let me see. Hold on a second. Just a moment. Let me see if I have one of those. Oh, okay. I found one. Are you seeing the car?
Yeah.
Floating over a fence?
Yeah.
That's from the first day of shooting. I shot about maybe 12 or 13 of these. Every car impacted in a different way, crushed in a different way, and they seem to be floating in thin air, right? So the whole thing was so fascinating to me visually. The mystery of, putting together the circumstances of the crash. Of course, there's, other cars piled below those cars. But when I got home, and I'm very impatient, so I immediately downloaded the image and started looking through them. I was like, okay, I'm definitely going to go back. There was enough there for me to go back. And over time, I started getting to know these people, these mechanics. And every time I would photograph them, I would bring back pictures. This guy, for example, this was the third time I photographed him. And the first two times, I thought the portraits were strong, but they were not the truth. So, not that there is one truth, of course, but aesthetically, it was not exactly what I was hoping for. And months went by, and I started photographing him in winter, and then the weather got hot enough that he was wearing a tank top, and I could see part of the tattoos on his body. And by that point, he really knew me. We had met a number of times. I had photographed him a number of times, and each time he was more trusting. And then this is where, let's say, I depart from strict documentary practice. I said to him, "Can you take off your shirt? I want to look at the rest of your tattoos." And ink on the body is a kind of biography, if you know how to read it, if you're paying attention. And some of the tattoos are older and more faded, and some of them are half finished sometimes on people, and that's all significant. There's a chronology here. Like the satanic-looking tattoos are older than the head of Jesus Christ. The bulldog with the knife through its teeth, the kind of poisonous-looking salamander. All the way on top is the name of his mother, and all the way on the bottom, it says, "Forgive me, Mother." And he explained to me that he got that tattoo first before he committed the crime, because he might not have a chance to apologize to his mother and beg her for her forgiveness. And it's like a capsule of his life on his back. And I was fascinated. From day one, I was fascinated by his heavy silver jewelry, which is a very Puerto Rican thing. And so I asked him to flip back the crucifixes so that I could have them in the shot as well. And, this is where I'm bending documentary practice to my own needs. My need is to zero in on the poetry of the thing. For me, this became like an altar, like a Baroque church altar that is found in so many Latin American churches. Such a density of information, such a richness visually. And that made the photograph what it is. Somebody might be upset by that. I could never submit a photograph like this to, let's say, a world press competition or something like that. This is not news. It's documentary, but it's a lyrical documentary. I'm stepping in. I'm taking liberties, trying to get to the powerful image. And so
I think you did a masterful job of explaining the difference. That is, you're exactly right. This also shows their comfort with you. It shows a connection that you have with them, and it's wonderful. I love the contrast. You are using your tools very, very effectively. And so the story behind this image is really, really strong.
Yeah, it was a really fascinating year. And, of course, a lot more work on my website, but I wanted to give you just a taste of Yonkeros and the kind of reality that was there for me working in Willets Point.
What's amazing too is that it no longer exists, and those people are no longer there. and so you captured kind of the final moments, and that also makes the series, and you turned it into a book.
Yeah, exactly. And the book opened a lot of doors for me, and that's, if we talk, let's say, career and being a professional, not every project deserves a book, but some projects really do. And if you put your passion behind it, your best effort behind it, it's incredible to hold it in your hands. And it's opened so many doors. It's led me to teach workshops in different countries, give artist talks, have exhibitions internationally. It got me my faculty job at the School of Visual Arts. And I had a chance to collaborate with one of my favorite writers, Francisco Goldman, who wrote the most beautiful title essay for the book, where he compares Willets Point to the lost city of Atlantis, fathoms deep, lost fathoms deep. And the book is many, many things, but it's amazing how Francisco was able to feel that kind of mythical thing that I was trying to get at. Someday this is going to be urban legend, right? Right now the ground is still too toxic from 40 years of fuel and waste being dumped into Willets Point. New York City hasn't been able to clean it enough that they can start building. But someday, yes, that will be one of those, high-rise, high-end neighborhoods because of the views of Manhattan. And people will never believe that once upon a time it was all junkyards. It will be amazing, 20, 30 years down the line to see these photographs and place them geographically where the high rises are, where the fancy restaurants and the boutiques and all of that are going to spring.
It would be great to do an art installation. So I'm sure someone would use this as an idea later. So here's a freebie for you, to do an installation on the ground floor of one of those buildings, of junk cars and stuff like that, and bring you into that. I think you did a great job. In my opinion, this is just me speaking, bringing you into one of these places. They do seem like you're transported to another world. It's almost dystopian, but organized. It's so
well said.
Interesting.
Well,
yeah. And with the way you described it, it reminds me of my old days. I used to go out there and go in and pull parts off cars and help people fix cars and stuff. I've got an old history, and working wrenches and stuff like that. So it was a very cool series for me. So we can move on to the next series, if you would like, which is a series of diptychs, and we can kind of take a look at that. Is that book still available, or was it like a limited run?
Yonkeros? Yeah, there's still a few copies, not many left, but there's still a few copies. I think on Amazon you might find a copy.